In this video, I'm going to talk about passive voice, which doesn't really have anything to do with anyone's voice. It's just the way that the sentence is structured in terms of the verb and the subject. Okay, under normal circumstances, the subject of the sentence performs the action. So in this sentence, for example, Chelsea threw the ball. Chelsea is the subject, and she is doing something. She is not passive, she is active. She is throwing. But passive voice is when the verb in a sentence expresses an action performed upon the subject of the sentence. In other words, the subject of the sentence is not performing the action. The subject isn't doing anything. It is having something done to it. So let's look at some examples. Here are two sentences that say the same thing. One in active voice, one in passive voice. Let's look at the active voice one first. Troy read the book. Pretty simple. Troy, being the subject of the sentence, is doing something. He's active. Okay, let's look at the passive version. The book was read by Troy. Now in this sentence, Troy is no longer the subject. The book is now the subject. And what is the book doing? The book isn't doing anything. Troy is doing something. Troy is reading the book, but Troy is not the subject anymore. The book is, because the verb refers to the book. So that's what it means by passive. Here, the subject of the sentence is passive. It's not doing anything. It's having someone else do something to it. Here's another example. In the active voice, Nicole bought the pizza. So again, Nicole, subject, verb, bought. She is doing something. The passive voice version of the sentence would be the pizza was bought by Nicole. So here, pizza is the subject. What is the pizza doing? Nothing. Nicole is doing something. Nicole bought the pizza, but Nicole is not the subject. So again, the subject in that version of the sentence is passive. It's not doing anything. So when you're trying to determine whether a sentence is in the active or passive voice, the first thing you have to do is find the subject. Sometimes that's really easy. In this sentence, Ziggy played guitar. Who's the subject? Ziggy, pretty simple. But it's not always that simple. This sentence, by the way, would be an active voice because Ziggy, the subject, is doing something. But what's the subject of this sentence? After we eat dinner, Joan will make strawberry shortcake. It's a little bit trickier. You have to think, well, who is the sentence about? Well, it's actually about Joan and what Joan is going to do. So this part of the sentence can confuse people because people would look for the subject. Well, what's the subject? Well, maybe it's we. But this is a dependent clause, right? After we eat dinner, it's got to finish. There's nothing to finish. So the subject actually comes over here. Joan will make strawberry shortcake. Here's your main verb, and this is the object. That's what she's going to make. So sometimes finding the subject can be confusing, but you have to look at what or who the sentence is about. So here's an example. Is this sentence active or passive? Before the dance, the gym was decorated beautifully. What is the sentence about? The subject of the sentence is the gym. What is the gym doing? Was the gym decorating? No, the gym was decorated. So this would be a passive sentence. It doesn't say who decorated it, but one clue about finding a passive sentence is was or other helping verbs. They can often indicate that passive voice is being used. It doesn't always work that way, but it's one clue. For example, look at this sentence. During the practice, the team was fighting constantly. Would that be active or passive? Well, let's find the subject. Who's the sentence about? the team, subject. Uh-oh. Does that make it passive? Is the team doing something? Yes, the team was fighting. So the sentence is active. That exists to make it past tense. So it can be confusing. Not every time you find a helping verb does that mean that the sentence is passive. Sometimes it's just, in this case, making it past tense. So again, you really have to find the subject and then determine whether or not the subject is doing something. Another example. Despite all their efforts, the team was beaten badly yesterday. So, who is the sentence about? Well, it's about the team. So is the team doing something? The team was beaten badly yesterday. No, they're having something done to them. They were beaten badly by the other team. So the other team in this sentence, which isn't actually in the sentence, but it's the other team that's active. They are actively beating this team. So this would be passive. So why is the active voice usually better? 1, it's usually clearer who or what is doing the action. 2, it tends to be more concise and less awkward. And 3, the writing feels more forceful and confident because there is a definite action taking place. For example, here we have 2 sentences, one in the passive voice, one in the active voice. In the passive voice, it says, the ball was stolen by Heather and the score was tied with her layup. In the active voice, that same sentence says, Heather stole the ball and tied the score with her layup. Now, which version is more efficient? Well, all you have to do is look at how many words it takes to say the same thing. In the active voice, it takes much fewer words to say the exact same thing. It's more efficient. It's more clear. Passive voice tends to be awkward and inefficient in its use of language. However, there are certain English teachers who think that any use of the passive voice must be incorrect. That is not true. In fact, there was a professor at BU who used to circle every passive voice sentence in a paper and send whoever the offending student was to the writing center where I worked, and it was our job to help them unmake all these passive sentences. Just because most of the time passive voice tends to be awkward does not mean that every time it's incorrect. Here are 3 sentences where you want the passive voice. Brian was murdered last night. That needs to be passive because what if we don't know who murdered him? Or the only person we care about is Brian because we don't know the murderer. Brian should be the subject of the sentence, even though he's not doing anything. Here's one that you often see politicians make. Many mistakes were made during the performance. You use that kind of language when you don't want to specifically say who made the mistakes. And then this one, the Beatles song yesterday has been performed more than any song in recent times. The subject of the sentence, the subject of what I'm talking about would be the Beatles song yesterday. It doesn't really matter who's doing the performing because the song is the subject. So in that case, again, you want the passive voice. But 80% of the time, probably, passive voice is just inefficient and pointless and would be better off in the active voice. And that's all. See you later.